because that's what I'm there for. Yes, there was a civil asset forfeiture hearing to be heard then, but that argumentation only comes into play if certain things happen during the criminal portion of that case. So let's slide on over, and here we go. Preface. I write this from a convalescence bed in Pillbox Medical Intensive Care Ward. This decision was reached before my catastrophic injuries. Oh, they were catastrophic, alright. Got 2 to the fucking nuts with a rubber shotgun. It's grim. And has been discussed with other members of the elected judiciary of San Andreas. Siobhan Fitzpatrick. Alan Crane. I have refused painkillers because I'm a hard man. And while I write this verdict, and thus would like to offer my apologies beforehand, if my language becomes terse, I thank those involved for their patience in awaiting this verdict. Case: The People versus Arush Patel Santana. Charges: drug trafficking and weapons trafficking. The legal issues surrounding this case and its complexities have not escaped me. My prima facie thoughts on this case have become usurped by logic and argumentation. I shall discuss each of these charges in turn. Mr. Santana was charged with drug trafficking, mostly based on argumentation surrounding constructive possession. This is specifically regarding the drugs in the possession of the fleeing initial defendant, Michi Frost. Drugs and drug paraphernalia found within her registered vehicles that she was also caught cultivating. The argumentation being simply that the property cultivation took place on belonged to Mr. Santana. The court notes the accusation in the initial search warrant for La Fuente Blanca that Mr. Santana knew and witnessed the harvesting the plants. So Dan Fairley does a search warrant, right? He catches Speedy with a Dragunov, takes the Dragunov, but then follows him back to La Fuente Blanca, right? They follow him back to La Fuente Blanca, where they find out, yes, Michi Frost was initially a defendant, but she went on the run. Like, she's left the city. Right, so they follow him back to La Fuente Blanca, find a massive weed, grow 40 plants or something, and they're like, holy shit. So they apply for a search warrant for the property because the weed goes up to the back door of the property, and they argue in that search warrant that Speedy knows and was aware of her growing that, and there's a connection between them, right? That's all in the search warrant. That's why they get the search warrant for the property. However, as you saw in the court case, there was very little evidence of a connection given between Michi Frost and Arush Patel Santana. It's harsh, but that's what it is. Right, so we fall into... she knew and had witnessed harvesting the plants. We fall into problems here, however. Legally, the constructive possession, in order for criminal charges to be successfully prosecuted, needs to be proven to the extent that Mr. Santana must have had knowledge of the drugs. So did he know they were there beforehand? We have no testimony nor evidence on record beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Santana knew of the marijuana cultivation, nor of the contents of Mrs. Frost's personally registered vehicles. So we don't also have any evidence that he knew what was inside the, I think it was a bison and a truck. Two different vehicles that she had that were searched. Like, there was nothing. There was no testimony. There was no interrogation. There was nothing where he admitted to knowing. It didn't happen, right? Like, he didn't know what was there. So finding him in constructive possession of it is rough. And he must have had the ability to control said objects. So he must have had access and control over those vehicles, right? Again, there is no indication at all that Arush Patel Santana had any control over those vehicles, and thus the drugs and the paraphernalia inside of them, which would grant us the ability to say he was in constructive possession of those things, right? That's what's missing. That's the issue at hand legally, right? So, again, we have zero evidence providing the argument that Mrs. Santana was ever in control of Miss Frost personally on vehicles. Finding someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of drug trafficking because a third party acted illegally upon their property without establishing complicity is not something this court is willing nor able to do. As to the other forms of drug paraphernalia found in the property, this is the... No, the search warrant's totally valid, right? The search warrant's valid because an officer put forward this argument in good faith, believing that it was factual, right? So they only need to hit a 51% threshold that a crime has been, is being, or will be committed on that property to go looking for those things. 51%. This is beyond a reasonable doubt. So what we need here is 99%. This is an entirely different level of playing field, right? It's not the same thing. Warrants are much easier to get. Much easier to get. Much easier to go looking than to find somebody guilty of the crime, right? So, right. Now, we look at the other forms of drug paraphernalia found on the property. Everything that was attached down in the secret room, right? The pictures that were all there, all those props, as the word was so horribly put out there. Right, look, here's the thing. We do not doubt the veracity of these findings, but find them insufficient on their own to press charges on an individual who has no serious history or pattern of drug distribution. Speedy doesn't have it. Honestly, there's no sale of drugs on Speedy's permanent record. Speedy has like one possession charge for meth, or a couple of possession charges for meth, but those have been like when he's been caught doing a job and he's been using it personally. It's not like he has a pattern of behavior or any of the other things that are required to, you know, show the intent to distribute, which would allow us to get to a drug trafficking charge from merely the setup in the basement, right? The setup in the basement is just not enough to get to a drug trafficking charge. So, right. We find them insufficient on their own to press these charges on an individual who has no serious history or pattern of drug distribution. If Miss Frost hadn't fled custody, I am left with little doubt as to her guilt on this charge. Right? First charge dealt with. Now we look at weapons trafficking, which was the second charge Speedy was prosecuted with, right? The unlawful transportation of a large quantity of Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 firearms, Molotov cocktails, and or rocket-propelled grenade launchers with the intent to distribute. Intent to distribute can be inferred through circumstances surrounding the discovery of the firearms or a pattern of behavior for the suspects, including large sums of money and or the possession of 6 or more firearms. Hey, thanks for the follows. So we're looking at intent to distribute and the unlawful transportation of a large quantity, right? So we need both. These two things are both required. We have a problem. This is the problem that myself, Crane, Siobhan, and Senator DW discussed at length that night, right? The problem is, moving on, we come to the meat of the matter, the heart of this case. Mr. Santana's property was found with the equipment necessary, the blueprints, which provide, if not direct proof of, at least the intent to manufacture illicit Class 2 weaponry, the purpose for which can be assumed to be heinous. In this is this weapon trafficking. The prosecution listed a series of weapons that we are to accept were manufactured using this equipment, the maker's mark present on all of these weapons. But no evidence of the transport of these weapons was entered. The unlawful transportation, that's weapons trafficking, remember? Right? No matter how I attempt to interpret this law, the requirement of transportation is there. Weapons trafficking was never intended to cover weapons manufacturing. This court is not stupid. It was proven to us that these things should not be happening were happening at La Fuente Blanca. However, we must look into Mr. Santana's rights. The legal principle of nullum crimen sine lege, no crime, no legislation. There is currently within San Andreas no such charge as weapons manufacturing, an issue we as a society must address with all alacrity so this can never happen again without due punishment. The court understands that had the correct legal framework and charges been present to the prosecution, they would have pushed more appropriate charges. Like, we all know that if there was a weapons manufacturing charge, Speedy gets charged with it and Speedy gets found guilty of it based on all of the evidence given. But there isn't a law. We can't make the law and then charge him with him retroactively. That's thoroughly unethical and a way to set about an absolute horrible precedent. Like, we will not do that. Nowhere does that. We don't do that in international law. We don't do that in England. We don't do that in America. It's not something we do, right? This court finds Mr. Arush Patel Santana not guilty on all charges pressed. As to the civil asset forfeiture of La Fuente Blanca, I have no jurisdiction to seize property without a successful criminal prosecution. All the charges are dropped. Mr. Santana is a free man. Judge Nathaniel Grayson. And this is what Nathaniel Grayson wrote up and wrote after waking up in pain from being chucked from a fucking helicopter by Arush Patel Santana. Now, he doesn't know it was Arush Patel Santana, but he knows he did this, and he knows there's going to be, like, come on, chat, we all know there's going to be some feedback on this one. And this was ready to go. Like, literally, I'll be honest, this was going to be the verdict no matter what happened. Yeah. It's been posted. It is now live. That is the verdict. Oh, I am absolutely aware, Occams. And you know what? I don't blame you at all. I know. Like, there is nothing that, but like, yeah. Hi, Dandy. How's it going? It's gonna be a thing. And the fact that, look, Grayson gets dumped out of a helicopter and then from his hospital bed writes this verdict. There's going to be accusations, right? There's going to be accusations. And I understand that. And I'm willing to deal with that because the reality is, legally, I'm on solid ground. So, let's get spicy, chat. Let's get spicy.